Southern African Custom Union's members, Botswana and Namibia, have expanded import ban on South Africa by adding citrus to its list of banned fresh products from South Africa. While Botswana's citrus ban on South Africa is for a period of 3 months, Namibia's ban will run until 2025. South Africa is the second largest exporter of citrus products to the world. Let's make sense of this with agricultural economist Paul Makube. Paul, are we witnessing a trade war taking place in the Southern African Customs Union?
Yes, good evening. Thanks for having me. Yes, it's a bit of a mini tough on trade. If you look at the produce involved, vegetables and fruits, and it doesn't only involve Botswana, it involves the neighbors Namibia as well. So definitely a trend is developing in terms of which the neighbors are resorting to trade restrictions in terms of banning imports from South Africa.
Look, Botswana has a policy in place, and the policy seems to be one of wanting to stimulate and grow local farmers. That is to say, providing material resources and other incentives to local farmers to grow certain products that they otherwise would import from other countries like South Africa. While that policy and project is underway, can it be classified as protectionism rather than just trying to stimulate its own local economy and, to use the words of some of their policy thinkers, to guarantee the food sovereignty and food safety sovereignty of their country?
Yeah, in this case, I think it is totally anti-competitive and actually protectionist. And the reason why is that, Botswana, for example, is not a big producer of citrus. So the landscape was not necessarily, unfair in favor of South Africa because they were not necessarily producing the product. South Africa was supplying the product. In terms of them growing their own economy and supporting their own local farmers, that is, commendable and that is, allowed for. But you don't interrupt the market mechanism in terms of, trade. There are instruments that they can use to actually support their own farmers, and there are a variety of them that internally they can use to actually grow domestic production. You only, intervene in the market when there is an unfair advantage by the importer. And in this case, you look at all the trade, remedies that are there. They are provided for in terms of the WTO. They are provided in terms of the circle agreements. So there are, remedies if you are unfairly, treated. So in this case, the issue of growing their own economy or growing their own, citrus, production is not a market issue, and therefore they should not be intervening in the market mechanism.
Yeah, focusing specifically still on citrus, South Africa is the second largest citrus exporter in the world. Botswana is a small market. Should South Africa's citrus farmers be worried about the impact this would have, given that they could just divert those quantities to a different part of the world?
Yeah, I think here we have to look at principle, and the principle is that we are looking at, deepening integration into the rest of the continent, and this is espoused in the Africa Free Trade Agreement, which seeks to actually deepen trade, within the continent. And such behavior, where you have intermittent bans on trade, is actually it then becomes counterproductive and actually is a regression in terms of what the continent is looking for, going forward. So these issues must be tackled, to ensure that we don't scupper this Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement. It's in its infancy. So it's a question of principle. Yes, South Africa can divert some of the fruit elsewhere, but South Africa also faces its own challenges elsewhere in terms of trade. You would recall that we have the EU problem, which is already at the WTO. So it also faces, it's not necessarily that it is a big player. There are other big players that are bullying South Africa as well. So yeah, so we have to consider those as well.
What is the correct and appropriate response to this? Anywhere in the world, by the way, not just to Botswana, not just to Namibia, anywhere in the world that cuts off South Africa, that imposes protectionist policies in terms of trade, what is the appropriate response there? Retaliation or mediation?
Yes, it's a question of engagement, and obviously, deeper engagement is understanding what the other countries are, coming from in terms of their argument, what they are presenting, and also, positing what would be the appropriate, interventions that the country can do to actually increase its production or actually address that particular situation. For example, if you look at Botswana, some of the producers that are involved in the expansion of citrus in Botswana are actually South African farmers, and material came out of South Africa into Botswana in terms of growing that particular sector. So there's a share of expertise, there's a share of material, across the border into Botswana. So it's a shared prosperity. So, but I mean, we understand that, at some stage, Botswana had to be self-sufficient in terms of their food and also compete fairly with South Africa. But in this instance, the intermittent bans are not necessarily helping out in terms of growing the farmers in Botswana. Moreover, if you look at the consumers as well, they are deprived of getting appropriate, pricing if you intervene in the market like that, because in terms of either quality or volumes, you are restricted to internal supplies, and then the consumer does not necessarily benefit from a relative price, favorable price that they can get if there was open competition on the market.
And just lastly, Paul, perhaps to consider this as well. Of course, poultry farmers and poultry wholesalers are bemoaning the ban on poultry from Brazil, saying that it's blowing the local market, dealing a heavy blow on the local market, very specifically on the fluctuation of prices. This is not protectionist. This is not retaliatory in any sort. This is purely about disease protection. In that instance, what mechanisms can the state put in place to, one, protect consumers, but also to make sure that farmers are protected?
Yeah, obviously, Newcastle disease, just like avian influenza, is a very devastating disease for any country, and obviously, any country it's followed by a ban on the supplying country, and in this case, Brazil. It supplies over 80% of our requirements in terms of imports, and therefore it will have a significant impact on the domestic market. But I mean, if you recall that South Africa has grown its domestic production, but also not only its domestic production has grown, but imports constitute just over 20% of domestic consumption. So in terms of protecting domestic consumers, it's actually left to the market. But you must look at whether supplies are sufficient and whether there are other suppliers that can come in. So you've got Argentina, you've got the US that are supplying. There are other suppliers into the domestic market. So there is open market in terms of supplies into the domestic market.
Yeah. Paul, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Agricultural Economist Paul Makube.